Welcome, everyone. We are the Unschooling Squad. We are a triad of lovers and practitioners of self-directed learning. These are our conversations on living learning, where we engage with special guests and explore our collective journeys into unschooling and self-directed learning. Today, we greet you from the unceded and occupied lands of the Lenni Lenape people, whom we honor as the original caretakers of these northeastern lands we currently call New Jersey. I invite you all to take a deep and collective breath as we honor, acknowledge, and hold this history. My name is Ana Maria, and I have the honor of sharing this journey with my friends Lisa Guillard and Dhyāna Kluth. Together, we have been inspired to support one another and our families as we deep dive into unschooling and self-directed education. We first began as a book club exploring the wisdom of and learned experience of seasoned unschoolers and parenting thinkers also. Most recently, we felt called to share what we are learning and all that we are curious about to explore and continue learning with you guys. So today we have a wonderful guest, and I'm going to pass it on to Lisa to introduce our guest for the day.
All right, thank you, Ana Maria. Today we are talking with Tomis Parker. Tomis has been facilitating in self-directed education environments since 2009. He helped to birth the first Agile Learning Center in New York City in 2013 and served as the director there. He now lives in Charlotte, North Carolina, where he works and plays at ALC Mosaic, a school and the first major collaborator in the ALC network founded by his wife. Tomis wants to organize a coherent movement of self-directed education because he believes that trusting children is the most powerful catalyst for social change. We also believe that trusting children is world-changing. I mean, unschooling, self-directed education, this belief is really what fuels us, and it informs how we live in the world, and it's why we make these videos, really, like to normalize trusting children. So thank you so much for being with us today, Tomis. Really excited to talk with you.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So how did you come to believe trusting children is the most powerful catalyst for social change? And wondering, what was the pivotal moment? Did you have a paradigm shift that allowed you to see another way of living and learning outside the framework of the dominant culture that you were raised immersed in?
Yeah, I definitely had there's definitely a shift moment, time period for me, catalyzed by some specific things that I think then also kind of drew on previous life experiences that I didn't realize were kind of sowing the seeds for that until that time. So I was trying to finish up a undergraduate degree in psychology and be done with school forever. I didn't like school growing up, and I was actually homeschooled for a year and a half when I was in first and half of second grade, and I think that wound up being a pretty formative experience for me, and realizing how little time I spent on schoolwork while I was homeschooled, and then when I went back to school, how I was, ahead of the classes in most of the subjects, and just kind of remembering, like, as a 7-year-old or whatever, just being like, well, that's like, what do you guys do then? I've been waking up at 10 and doing workbooks for 2 hours and then playing the rest of the day, and you're all here apparently doing this all the time. So I didn't think too deeply about it as a 7-year-old, but that was a seed planting moment for me. And then I basically found this book called Summerhill: A Radical Approach to Child Rearing, when I was in college. One of my best friends recommended it to me because we were both fans of Eric Fromm, the social psychologist who wrote the foreword for the US printed version of that book. And I was just at a time in my life where I was really trying to figure out for myself how I was going to survive after, like, in the world, because school was about to end and I knew I wanted it to end. I was really ready to be done with writing papers and all of the kind of tedious things about school that I just thought were ridiculous and had no meaning to me. But I've also been someone who's always kind of really been looking for deeper meaning and not easily placated by kind of what most people around me were doing or finding it pleasure or entertainment in. And so, yeah, I read that book and it just kind of, light bulbs are just kind of going off for me, because I was also, like, at a very intellectually rich time in my life where I was reading a lot about history and economics, and really just kind of seeing how everything that I was taught, the way things weren't exactly quite that way. And so then just this whole idea that children could be trusted to live their lives however they wanted just really kind of was profound for me. Like, the idea that, I talk about it a lot and think about it in terms of, when I was growing up, the message I always kind of got from the adult world was like, there's a lot of things that you don't want to do, but, like, deal with it. And like, like, too bad, like, that's the way it is. That's the way it is. And it is not changing, like, this is the world we live in. And your job is to, like, figure out how to operate successfully within it. And it doesn't matter that, aspects of how the world functions don't seem to work well for you or your body or your mind or your spirit. Like, deal with it. And so I think the vision that was in Summerhill for me, and kind of being in that psychology world and, like, in an intellectual space myself, Neil's, like, philosophical musings about all the kinds of things related to the school really resonated with me and was an access point for me, and just seeing, like, this is, I could become a social worker. Like, there's that great talk out there somewhere about the kind of different roles people are playing and bringing about a new paradigm. And one of them is kind of like the hospice worker, the people that are in the system, caring for people in that system. And that's something that, like, I just can't get energy for, because I personally, like, I'm so grateful there are people that can do that, because I have a hard time doing things that feel like bullshit to me. And so I think just having this idea that the root cause of so many of our social problems as a society have to do with how we actually view children. Like, are they meant to just exist in the broken world that we've created for them, or are they actually meant to, like, create a different world? And it sounds kind of cheesy and hokey, and at the same time, it's like, I think it's pretty profound in terms of, like, how it affects just so many ways about how you view the world. So that was just kind of like the starting point for me at that point. Yeah.
Thank you, Thomas. You really touch on some really moving, profound pieces there for, I think, all of us are on the same page with you. And what strikes me about this, on the one hand, we're trusting children, right? And we really wholly believe in them to be able to create the world that they want for themselves, right? When we shift outside of the paradigm we've come from. And then on the other hand, because we've come from this paradigm where we are involved in how children develop their own tools. Like we have this scaffolding, and so how much do we, how can we do that without controlling or oppressing them by like just having these old ways of being come through that question, right? How much they trust themselves, how much they can trust themselves. In that context, also just because of the background you've come from, you came to this awareness through your studies, right? And the books you've read and were exposed to. So how do you bridge that? How much do you credit where this idea and the acumen you have for understanding this alternate way of being, how much can you credit the system you were raised in, and then how do we do that without that system?
Well, I mean, everything's kind of interconnected, and like in your own life experience, it's hard to separate out from me and say like, this was an influence of, formal education, or this was an influence of my parents, or this was an influence of my own self-direction. Those things are all kind of interplaying on each other in my, in my experience, and for all of us in different ways. But I mean, I really do, like, the Summerhill was not part of my curriculum as a psychology major, and my very generic undergraduate degree in psychology, and there was one developmental psych course that had maybe 2 pages in a textbook on alternative education that had a paragraph about Montessori education and a paragraph about Waldorf education, nothing about democratic education or the history of free schooling or unschooling. I don't even know. I don't remember John Holt's name being recommended. I don't remember anything about indigenous wisdom being mentioned there. So it definitely was of my own interest and of my own relationship making that kind of led me to discover those ideas. So I don't actually credit my formal education for much of it. And it was my experiences having time outside of formal education that also kind of reinforced those ideas. But yeah, I mean, it's all kind of part of the system, part of the process. So yeah, and I think, is the question kind of about like, how do we balance was that just a personal question for me, or is there more in like, how do we balance the kind of like, we're raising children and they need we need to care for them and like provide for them, and also like the interplay of that and letting go and letting them be their own thing?
Yeah, it's both, because I'm also, seeing that in the context of the Agile Learning Center, as well as in your personal life as a family, model for your children, how there are these structures in place and how that can support trusting children. But then there's also this, possible, well, maybe outside of the training that you're offering people, who are going to become facilitators, like I can see that there would be a danger for someone to take these structures and use them to control, right, the children. And so how do we not, it was a personal question, as well as this kind of philosophical, context for exploring how we're doing this. We're creating new ways that don't exist, and how do we then share that with people who don't have any context for this at all?
How do we share, you mean like the kind of like value of self-directed education and trusting children with people?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess kind of to get back to maybe the philosophical like overarching concept of what you're talking about. I mean, in practice, in like daily practice for me, like there's a kind of a larger philosophy too that I can draw a lot of strength on from around just like how I view myself as an individual. And I think that it's also a big part of like Western way of being, that we all kind of see ourselves as like these distinct individual souls and individual people who are like, we have a beginning and an end, and we're kind of all kind of separate and cut off from each other, and we're all different people, and our nouns are all like the words we use for things are all like static and frozen in time and not actually like this emergent thing. And so we view people that way, and we view our children that way. Like our children are, we are ourselves, and we have our children, and our goal is to like train and raise them and educate them and like link them into us and to other things that will provide, balance and success or whatever for them. But I think like for me, when I think about my son as more as like not an extension of myself in that like he's mine, but just the way that anyone else would be, that really like my goal is not to try to get him to make my life less difficult or more comfortable or more manageable or to solve the logistics, but like, I have this opportunity to support him however he needs support, so that he could actually do life in a much more like creative and powerful and possibility driven way than me. I as an adult, like there's already ways in which my thinking and my way of kind of understanding the world is very fixed, and I have to do a lot of intentional work to kind of disrupt those neural pathways, where there's something exciting about raising a young child and knowing that like, there's so many more ways he can come to see the world and understand himself and understand his role in the world. And so I do, I think that there's a lot of tension for me, and like I'm trying to like live my life and enjoy it, like grow and expand, but also like feel comfortable, and then also always knowing like what part of how you're living your life is either expanding possibilities for your child or collapsing them. And I think that's the part that I think can feel exciting or stressful depending on what's going on.
It's interesting because, I mean, at least to me, right, I discovered unschooling after already being a parent, and viewing my daughter's reaction to being in school, and it was like, doing everything in her power to just show how much she didn't want to be in that space, right? So then I found myself having to sort of learn all these things, right, that you said you discovered in college. So I guess you kind of just touched on it, but I'd love to hear more about like tools you use or practices you use to disrupt, behaviors and thoughts as a father, because I think, right, it's a really challenging thing for most people when they're like, yeah, I do want to do this. Of course, I want to trust my kid. Of course, I want to grant them autonomy. But then the things that their kids are doing are really triggering them. So yeah, just some more, if you could, about what you do to disrupt those kind of thoughts and behaviors. Yeah.
I mean, first of all, I feel pretty fortunate that I feel like my experience of my parents growing up was one in which also I think was, fairly formative for me being able to resonate with a lot of these ideas. I felt, trusted by them for the most part. Like I felt like at the deepest level, very trusted by them. And I also felt aware of the ways in which who they were as people, kind of navigating the world and trying to figure things out and do the best they could, also would kind of bring this extra layer in to things that maybe didn't feel like trust, but I almost knew that it was like more their thing than my thing. So and as my father also was, his personality, which the older I get, some weird things where you're like, oh, that's where that comes from, you know, like, no, he was fairly like hands off in a good way. Not we had a, you know, engaged, had a good relationship, spent a lot of time together, but like very much just kind of like, you know, do your thing. Not overly restrictive, you know, compared to a lot of peers I had and stuff. So I do like have I feel like a fairly good baseline for that. I think some of the ways, I mean, my son's 3, so the challenges, the way like the way this manifests is going to be different at kind of different developmental stages, obviously. But right now for me, a lot of it has to do with like living in a world where I see so much of the like, you know, the hustle and bustle of life, and I'm fortunate to have a living situation that doesn't demand so much of that of me. But even if you're just like, okay, well, today we want to go to the grocery store and then the park and then go to this other thing, and that's going to require some logistics and some coordination and some being on time and some putting on of shoes and whatever, you know, even just with those types of things, you know, I know that I've inherited from a world this kind of perspective of like just or moving little children around to fit, you know, the like plan for the day or the timeline for the day or the, you know, the basic kind of expectations of like how you operate in the world. And sometimes that means like physically moving their bodies without their permission. And so I'm at kind of a stage moving out of it now at 3, but like there is like this kind of, you know, thing that was going on for me a lot of like, when you have a baby, like we would do our best to like narrate for him like what we're about to do when we would move his body, so that there's at least communication about that. But you're not actually really getting consent for it. You're just now I'm gonna pick you up. Yeah. And now like you're in this kind of stage where like you know, just navigate like when do I actually ask my 3-year-old for his like explicit permission for something versus like you know, doing it and then apologizing if he doesn't like it versus like suggesting, and then what you kind of have to deal with a 3-year-old when you open up the floor for debate, you know, versus just being like, this is what we're doing. So I think that there's a lot of like interesting nuance there for me. But I can be like an over, you know, I just take the liberty of like over explaining things to him. We've always kind of done that, and it's kind of shown up now in his, you know, language development and how he is. But that's just one way I know how to navigate it, is like, all right, well, let's just talk about all the different dynamics that are going on here and be as transparent as possible. But yeah, I mean, like recently I had the other night, my son's fairly high maintenance sleeper. Like he actually said like, I don't know how to close my eyes, which isn't true, but he doesn't know how to like lay in bed and just chill at the end of the day. So we've always had some sort of like put him in a carrier, put him in a stroller kind of situation to go to bed. So even still now, the quickest way to have bedtime be complete is to put him in a stroller and take him for a push is what we call it. So the other night it was like transitioning from reading books to going downstairs to get in the stroller, and he didn't want to put a shirt on. I like, you know, like I get the shirt out, put it on his head, and no. Then I waited a minute or two and tried it again. I was like, no, I don't want to wear a shirt. And so there was kind of like one of those like small but like crucial moments for me of being like, okay, like, I mean, I wouldn't want to go in a stroller right now at night when it's 60 degrees outside without a shirt, you know, and just having to think through like, all right, well, is it actually like a big deal? We have blankets down there. So then I just, whenever there's resistance, like that's a clear, like to me, like a clear opportunity to just like stop and check in and be like, okay, well, what's this, like, what's the resistance about? And maybe it's not even so much important about like, what's the resistance about? Because you might not figure that out, but like, do I need to continue doing what I'm doing? That's, you know, the other half of the equation here for the resistance. So I just tried to shift it into like, okay, like let's go on your first push with no shirt. That'll be awesome. You know, like a no shirt push, and like make up a song about it immediately and like make it playful and fun. And his like face lit up like, oh my God, we're gonna no shirt push. Like it's not, who cares? But he just, you know, it's amazing now. And then, you know, just kind of shifting from that point where like I would imagine so many parents, and I could see myself if, you know, I allow myself just like getting so frustrated and having a breakdown and be like, you have to put a shirt on, you cannot go outside. And then you shut down and leave the room, and then the whole, and he's, you know, it's like, I also remember witnessing, you know, friends of my parents with other family members parent when I was a kid differently than my parents, in a way where like they were a lot more like high strung about certain details, and just seeing the like conflict that they would have with their kids, and that they would like the unnecessary, like the strife that they would cause themselves because they wanted something to go a specific way. And so, you know, I'm not like free from those moments at all myself, but like I can use those memories to kind of like help me stop and really pause and understand like what's really important here. And so much of the time it's just not that important.
Yeah, that's really powerful, Tomis. I mean, we've had this conversation before with other guests as well, where this has come up about what are really the practices that are carrying us through building healthy relationships with our children. Because essentially, whether you're unschooling or doing some form of self-directed education, what you really are trying to nurture is a healthy relationship. And you have this beautiful experience that you were able to develop that with your parents. And there was some of that already intrinsically in your becoming as a child. But for many of us, like we've struggled to come to that place, right? And so I love the question that Lisa asked, just in terms of like really coherent practices. And I love that the idea of taking a pause has come before, and that you're bringing it up again is, I feel, I just want to invite us all to take a moment to really capture how important that is. No matter at what degree you are of your own self-development, about being able to acknowledge that your relationship with your child is paramount, right? That should be at the forefront of everything. That the practice of pausing is going to allow us that moment of becoming creative. Because on that example that you gave, what you basically did is pause, become mindful of your own state, right? Where you are at, picked up memories, you know, like, and we're talking about milliseconds here, that
Right.
process, you know, I can only imagine you sitting there, and it's like within seconds, you are accessing neurologically, spiritually, in all these different levels, you are accessing an internal place that allows for creative thinking. And I love to translate that now into the work that we are doing as self-directed facilitators and unschoolers, right? That in a way, as the adults that are going through like the deschooling process, the decolonizing process, right? Before, I'm gonna kind of jump back and forth a little bit, but before you were talking about this Western idea of individuality, of this focus on the self, right? And so many of us just have no knowing of any other way of being here, right? Like I have access to my native heritage, and I got to see some of that, but still, we've really been violently ripped out of getting to know other ways of knowing and other ways of being in the world. And so us, like our generation of adults that is really trying to lead self-directed education and autonomy in children in this time is, one, accessing a genetic memory, hopefully, right? Like being able to access that genetic memory, but also being able to, as you mentioned before, and I'll just honor Adrienne Marie Brown for bringing us such a beautiful, right? Beautiful idea of emergent strategy and emergent thinking. I know that there were others that she picked up from, but I feel like we've been gifted in our generation this idea that we can envision, we can return to our genetic memory, our intuition, right? And you spoke in many different moments. I could catch that you really connected with intuitive knowing in yourself, right? That was able to guide you in the direction that you wanted or you felt like was important to go, even from after college. And And then we have this beautiful ability to think and envision forward in what we want. And I mean, I would just love to hear from you now, like switching into, like, I love hearing about you and being a father, and please dive in more if there were more moments or more ideas that you want to share about that. But I'm really curious about your work, and it seems like you've really been immersed in this idea of not only working with young people and creating this new emergent way of being in the world, accessing that inner creativity, but you're also working with adults to support children in that way. And if you could just give us a sense of what you have uncovered through that work, what are you seeing in that emergent work? And just take us on a dive with that.
Yeah. I don't work with children that much really anymore. But part of what when I moved to New York after I kind of discovered this whole concept and went on a personal, like, starting deep dive into the whole space, moved there to be closer to a couple democratic schools that had started in New York City, and then worked with one for 3 years. And I learned in those first 3 years of working with that school, like, this field of work or whatever, unschooling self-directed education, before that was a term, was something that I really wanted to, that I was committed to my life, committed to, like, supporting and advancing. But the actual, like, but also recognizing that, like, being with kids all day drains me like crazy. It's not actually where so I learned that just wasn't where my contribution to the work was going to come from. So yeah, like, one of the exciting things about the ALC project was kind of, I had learned that about myself in the first few years of doing the work, that informed the kind of role that I created and carved out and emerged for myself in that ALC space. And, like, a big part of that, after the first year, and I met my wife, who had started the school down here, and we had kind of worked with other facilitators in our network to create what we had called ALF Summer, Agile Learning Facilitator Summer, kind of like intensive. And the idea there was to have, like, embodied training, which was really just adults coming together and embodying an ALC together, like, whatever tools and practices we want to learn to use with kids, we're going to do ourselves, and essentially experience, like, a self-directed, self-organized, co-creative, co-learning experience. And so we got to do that from 2014 until 2019. Obviously, last summer we had to take a year off. Yeah, I mean, I think it's so much so much of the work is with adults. Like, this is something I've learned to create more and more filters for for people who are interested in joining our community here at Charlotte at ALC Mosaic, because if you are really wanting this, then you really can kind of come in from any entry point and start the journey. But because we're like a school, we're set up as a school, and people kind of find us that way. Often they come to us because it's like, the last 3 schools didn't work, or my kid's really unhappy. And one thing I've really learned over the years is, like, unschooling and self-directed education isn't just educational choice for your kids, and it isn't just, like, not going to school. It's, like, actually really intentionally choosing different path that is much more work for the adults involved than it is for the kids. And so I've learned that, and I've learned to be really, really clear with parents who are interested in our school about that, because it's easy it's interesting. We'll have people come for a tour, in the middle of the day. We like to have people visit when we're happening, so they can really see, oh, there's a naked 5-year-old running around. Like that's, I've never seen that at a school before. And so, but also like, you know, their child will come with them, and within minutes, their child is off running and playing and making friends and like having a great time, and then never wants to leave when the tour is over. And then the whole time I'm just talking to the parent about how much work this is going to be for them, for them when, you know, if what this really means. So, yeah. And I think, you know, before when you're talking about like intuition and kind of drawing on your past experiences or like ancestral experiences or inner knowing and all of that, I think that that's like can be like that's kind of the distinction for like whether or not this is like going to work for someone or whether or not this is for someone, is like you have to really kind of be clear about like what is it that you want for your child. And I think for the most part, people don't want what traditional education is providing or producing, but a lot of people actually haven't really given enough clear thought to like what it is they do want, and then organizing aspects of themselves and their thoughts and their, you know, actions around that. And so you know, often people do, like, if people aren't really thinking critically about that, they do just kind of want their kid to obey their orders when they give them, and like make, you know, like, you know, be an easy child to manage, you know, or whatever. So or they they're coming to us in our context and just starting for the first time to think critically about the fact that learning might not just look like producing a worksheet or like some sort of thing that you can hang on the refrigerator, and then what the implications of that are going to be. So yeah, I mean, it's such a, you know, the more I learn, the more I spend time in this space, the more I just learn that like I see that being adults doing their own work and also connecting and being with each other in the process is so important, because that's where you can transcend the ever pervasive forces that exist in our world that are telling you like, you know, that your child's behind, or this is what, you know, learning looks like, or this is what success looks like, and da 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 da. And then once you get into that space and you kind of like fully remove yourself from the other context, then it's like you've just actually begun this process that can really turn into like, I mean, rabbit hole is like one metaphor, but it's less like dark and terrible and more like, you know, expansive and lovely, but there's also some like, can be some really challenging steps along the way, especially when you have relationships with people that are rooted, you know, that aren't sharing this context with you. Like that's another whole thing that's so challenging for adults, is like you kind of start going down this path and it's like, wow, this is amazing, it's working well for our family, but grandma's like really stressed out, or the neighbors are like, you know, making fun of my kids because they're not reading or whatever. Like there's always, you know, these kind of pain points with interfacing with the rest of the world. And I might be going a little tangential here, but I you know, I'll take, it's like last week I took my son to this, you know, gym, like gymnastics gym, where they have like a couple open hours for toddlers or young children. And just those moments where like I witness other people parenting and then realize like, oh, yikes, I forgot that, because I live here at ALC Mosaic on campus. We live on campus, and most of my social life, like intentionally, like, you know, when I got in, I didn't know, I was concerned as a young person in my 20s if I would ever meet, you know, a partner that would work for me, because they would have to understand this and be and you know, be on board with some of these larger values that I was growing into. And so, you know, much of my social life is built around being with people in this context. So when I forget, when I go out into the world and see people, you know, saying horribly manipulative things to their 5-year-old or whatever, that it's like, you know, like like, oh, right, that's how it is out there.
Yeah, no, I don't think you're going on a tangent at all. I was just, thinking of wanting to dive in even more and ask, like, when you come across parents who want to step into this, right? They want it and they're just beginning to unpack some of what this means. What kind of support do you have to offer people who are exploring and coming up against those edges and are fully committed and dealing with family or community, right? Like you said, who make it difficult to stay the course?
I also, can I just add to that too? Because you mentioned, which I thought was just so interesting, you mentioned just saying how you worried about finding a partner in your 20s because whoever you met would have to like get where you're coming from. And so many struggles that the three of us have heard from friends, from other people in our community, happens within, marriages, with couples, with partners where one parent is like, I've discovered this thing, this is how I want to live with my children. And then the other partner is like, well, absolutely not. Like my kid's got to go to college. Like my kid's got to clean their room when I snap my fingers, So I just thought that was so interesting that you mentioned that. And then I just wanted to tack that on to what Dhyāna said, because I think that's like a really kind of monumental, it happens so often. So anyway, please.
It does happen very often. It's another thing that I have seen and been a part of in sometimes unfortunate ways. But yeah, so I guess to your question, Dhyāna, I think being, like I said earlier, like being around other people who have chosen this and it's kind of like when people talk about playing, like if you're playing a sport or learning a skill. I played a lot of sports growing up, and so this is always this metaphor works for me. But like when you're trying to get better at something, it serves you to play with people who are better than you, and because it's going to kind of raise your focus, and you're going to learn from them by just kind of imbibing through proximity, and there's just all kinds of like things that are going on there that make it, you're going to rise to kind of the occasion in a sense. So to me, it's like really important for people to find others who are doing the unschooling or the self-directed education or are choosing the peaceful parenting path, and to who have more experience than they do in that, and to make sure that becomes a big part of their daily, weekly, regular experience, to be in a relationship with those people, to spend time with those people. That's just, to me, that's just something that's so clear to me about learning. This minor tangent here, but relevant to the conversation, is like so much of learning that people do is through relationship. And I actually, I think that one of my, like, I haven't done so much of any of the things that I've done in this field myself. Like, I've just been really good at knowing who to put myself around and knowing how to learn from others, and knowing how to like kind of match the alchemy of different people's skills and abilities into groups that can kind of cover the gamut of needs to make something happen. And so anyway, I think the first thing is like finding people who you can draw strength from, because they have more confidence in the life choice and in the daily choices that you come up as a parent of, like, how am I going to address the situation? When you see someone confidently back off the need to control a child and give them space, it's just immediately like, oh, huh. Like, you see how they did that in that moment, and it gives you a vision for how you could do that too. So to me, there's really nothing more important than that. That could replace, reading any book or listening to any talk, or, you have to have that. Not that the other things aren't helpful, but a lot of it depends on who you are and how you learn too. So how you integrate new things into your life and how you are. So that would be the biggest thing. I mean, we obviously provide a bunch of resources. We've shifted our enrollment process to actually have like a whole, like sort of ironically, like admissions class online. So that people actually can get all of the information about who we are and all of our overarching values before they come in. Because I mean, I'm sure, as you know, there are, people who practice self-directed education or unschooling who aren't necessarily interested or particularly concerned in the liberation narrative of other people who aren't like them or don't look like them or have, come from the same background. And it's much more of kind of like an individualistic, like we can do capitalism better than capitalism's doing capitalism if we take our kids out of school and let them become, fierce little entrepreneurs who are going to be the next, Jeff Bezos or whatever. So for us, it's pretty important to kind of share like the whole picture for the values of our community up front. And inside of that, we give lots of resources for people to be able, and as you know, like there's so many great podcasts, there's so many great books, there's so many great places to kind of get fed. So it just depends on how you like to get fed from other people, from reading, from whatever. So that, there's no shortage of resources for someone that's truly hungry for it. And I that's in the same way I've learned that about how to facilitate with kids, how to support them without interfering with them. It's just, as parents, that when your child's really actually interested in something, you don't really have to ask yourself how to support them. Like it becomes really clear, like they either like, I need you to take me to the store to get these things for this project that I'm going to do, or, you can find out what support looks like very quickly, or you can realize like, I just need to get out of their way and let them go. I think like in our context, people get tripped up a lot when like kids aren't doing things that look like much to them. A lot of the learning, like they're in like one of the valleys where like they're maybe just kind of processing a lot, or they just need to chill out, or they're integrating a lot that they had previously taken in, and it doesn't look like they're doing much. And so it's like, how do I support them in like doing something? And I've seen adults and facilitators go through all kinds of crazy processes to try to inspire children to do things that look fun and productive and interesting, but the reality is that often is always coming from the insecurity of the adult. So I think the same thing translates for adults who say they're interested in, unschooling and self-directed education. It's like, all right, well, I mean, it's difficult in that working families only have so much time to, spend researching things or whatever. But if you're interested, there's really not a shortage of opportunities to learn more and become more confident in the choice. But yeah, what was the second part of the question again, Lisa? Your tag on?
I was just asking if you had any like insight or words of wisdom for like, partners who one is into this idea and the other one is not, or at least is like, doesn't want to, I guess that they're not into it.
Yeah, this next one is tough. It's such I've thought about like, maybe I should do a podcast or some sort of thing that's like about men in the SDE space.
Yes.
But it's hard for me. It's hard for me because I honestly just don't. I just don't have a lot of patience for them. So I don't know that I'm actually the one to support them, because I'm actually easily triggered by it. Like men that don't get it and are the reason why it's not working for their kid, for their family or whatever. I would have to do a lot of my own work to be able to be effective in that domain. I I don't know. So maybe re-ask the question as specifically as you can, so I can find an entry point here that's hopefully useful at some level.
Well, I mean, I think what you said is actually very useful in and of itself, and I think like I want to say I can relate too, right? Because it's like when you've done all the work and you're doing all the work, and this really, I mean, even more so for you, right? Because you work at the school and you run the center, but it's not right. It's not about education. It's a lifestyle choice. It permeates like absolutely everything that we do. So to try and convince somebody, or not even convince, but like to try and walk somebody down this path who really doesn't want to go down it, right? That's also not consent based. It's we're not getting their consent. And so a lot of times I feel like that's really what the situation is. And so maybe it's not even a good question to ask. I feel like what you said was great. And I don't know, we can move on. I know we have more questions and our time's running out. So I was going to just move to like Anna Maria for her next.
Well, I do want to piggyback on this, and then I'll ask a separate question. But what it makes me think of is experiences that I'm having as I'm working with the Mexican undocumented immigrant community here, and observing just the levels of stress that they're experiencing right now during COVID, and how that stress is unleashed upon the bodies of their children, right? Whether it's through yelling and manipulation and all of that. And so I just want to honor as well that some of the resistance that could be there from men or from anyone to this idea of living in this way comes from pain, you know, like in truth. And I can speak about it too from a personal experience, that I wasn't always able to open myself to this life. You know, like we've gone from, you know, I was trained as a teacher, so we've run the full gamut of like the homeschooling spectrum onto radical unschooling, right? And then thinking about it in terms of indigenous ways of knowing. So I've gone through the whole thing, and I know how difficult it is to make the transition from wanting to control, because that's all you know, that's the only way that you've known to be in this world, and letting go. And the letting go is so scary and so painful, right? And many men and many women protect that, because that's the only thing we know how to do, is to protect ourselves from wanting to, like, who wants to put themselves through that transformation, right? And so I just want to honor that it is not a light journey, right? We might be talking about it in this way that is light and fun and privileged even. It's not a light journey, but it is a life transforming journey. And as you speak it, you know, it is a social transforming journey. It can have such a ripple effect in the way in which we build culture. Yeah, so I just want to honor, like I do feel like it is in a sense of, this is not a cult, right? This is not like we're gonna change the way you think, or we're gonna wash your brain, but it's really about asking the question of how do you want to be in relationship with others in your life, with the people that you love, right? And I think that, I don't know if that's an entry point for you, but also the other question that that's going to come out of this is again how to make this lifestyle equitable, right? And you've created a space there with your colleagues. How does that work? Like, how do you create an equitable experience for people who may not be able to access unschooling and self-directed education as individuals in their families, because of being single parented homes, because of having the pressure of racism and oppression for years, right? Like, yeah, what does that look like on your end? What are your thoughts?
In terms of equity?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I think it does tie back to like what you're saying about, you know, how many people might be in a completely different place and have a completely different openness to these ideas if their basic human needs were taken care of in a way that they're currently not, right? You know, that's that's like when we talk about the whole, it's just like the whole conversation of like education reform or whatever, and it's like, to me, it's like it's just, you can't even have that conversation without having conversation about economic inequality. And there's so many intersecting things there, right? Like you can't have the ideal conditions for families to raise children if two parents have to work 50 hours a week. Like it's just, so our priorities are all jacked up. But yeah, I mean, the equity piece is hard. I mean, it's hard to create an alternative to the public school system that is also accessible, right? Because like we can't do what we do in the traditional system, so we have to operate outside of it. So we have to have income that comes from somewhere, so people have to pay that. So I mean, where we've landed after this, trying to solve that problem is just to have we have a very wide sliding scale of tuition to make, so families at our school pay anywhere from $1,200 a year to $12,000 a year. And then it's, important to us that part of our values is like making that really, really clear that like some people here are paying 10 times as much as other people. And that's the way it needs to be and the way it should be in our current context, because people have different means. And we're actually intentionally trying to disrupt the idea that some schools should be available for some people and not for others, or some things or opportunities or whatever. And we are fortunate in North Carolina to have a statewide program called the Opportunity Scholarship that has made it possible for us to enroll, I think 17 kids right now that have the scholarship. So we can enroll many more families at that lower tier or first couple of tiers that get this sort of like a voucher type thing that comes with them to supplement their tuition at our school, because we have to have like financially, if we don't maintain like an average of 5,000 to 6,000 per student, then then we have the other equity piece of like, well, we want to be accessible to as many families as possible, but then are we going to pay our facilitators like a wage that they can't raise their families on? So there's two dueling pieces there, and that's definitely challenging, and we're kind of trying to work our way to a point where that's kind of working out on both ends of that spectrum. But I mean, that's at least my kind of experience navigating the equity pieces in the context of starting running a school or a private school, or what we are, like all ages learning community, and outside of publicly funded institutions. So yeah, it's not, there isn't like a really great solution. There's just lots of little tweaks that you can kind of make along the way.
Thank you, Thomas. You give me such hope and inspiration, and like, may we be able to, and may people who are watching be able to, follow your lead and create spaces in our families or in our own local communities with alternative ways of doing this. And may more, more local governments put together things like that allow, equitable access to these alternatives as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and I guess I could ask these questions myself to people I know, but would be interested to know too from you all, as you continue what you're doing, if you come across situations where there is usually the male partner in those relationships that maybe was cold to the idea and then became warm to it, like what was the things that supported or eased that process or contributed towards the shift in perspective. I'm just thinking out loud now as we're talking about like harvesting those types of stories could be really useful and powerful, because just to see if there's any kinds of trends there in terms of like what actually might connect for, and I'm sure the type, like the who that person is and the context they come from would matter a lot in that, because you were talking about, Mexican immigrants and the challenges they face, and a lot of the like dads that I talked about that I don't have the patience for are typically they're not dealing with undue like socioeconomic stress, and the reason that they're not on board is because like their culture is one that says like they'll have been a success as a father if their child gets into an Ivy League college and goes on to make live in a large house and make a lot of money, and that's essentially what they've boiled down the educational process to be about. And so in those contexts, it's hard for me to, I've always felt like I'm just on a different planet than those people. So I don't even know what, like, I've just learned to create a filter so that people who can go on the process are the ones that find us. Otherwise it can create a lot of challenges when you're starting out and you need new families to have something to exist at all. You can't be picky, and then it creates a lot of work on the other side of the thing when they get inside and you're like realize the alignment was very, very tenuous. So
yeah, I hear you. Yeah, we'll keep our eye out for that, and it really centers on all the themes that we picked out for our conversations, that based on the conversations we've had, which is the trust, right? The control and oppression, privilege and liberation from these old systems and paradigms. And we just want to support the people. And it's really hard for partners when one is not on board, and really want to find ways to support them. The one partner who is seeing the one way, to help get them the tools to then manage the relationship, like you said so astutely. It's all about relationships and learning through relationships and healing through relationships. A lot of this work is really healing work. So
also, can I also add, like, I'm just gonna call it out. Like, it's the violence of capitalism, right? Like, it's constant violence, because what you're naming, Tomis, is the same exact situation that a lot of these families are experiencing, right? In terms of like the psychology of this,
right.
Which is that their kid needs to be in school for however long. And the stress that they put on their kids, and all of us immigrant kids have gone through,
right.
is 10 times what the child who's well off, who has a white father who wants to send them to the Ivy League, I mean, while the disparity is incredibly huge in various societal levels, the thread there is the violence.
Right. Yeah, and for the privileged family, they've just internalized that their job is to maintain this particular system and this particular culture and this particular way of thinking. And just because they're kind of on the benefiting end of it doesn't mean that like it's working for them. And that's the thing. I struggle. We'll often come across families where it's like they're like, well, we're just interested in the school for our son. Our daughter is doing well in school and it's working for her or whatever. I'm like, it's always a tough one for me to my immediate reaction is always like major skepticism about alignment. And so there have been situations where you get their foot in the door with one child and then you go on the journey and it's like, wow, and then that transforms the family. And so I always want to like hold the possibility for that. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, there are, it's that kind of like just looking to kind of do the same thing all over again. And there are families that are benefiting from that culture, but are not seeing the ways that they've just internalized all of that. So,
well, I recognize the thoughtfulness that you put into that, and that holding that line and that awareness and all that work, and just I honor it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you all for what you're doing. Like I said, there's just nothing more important than people having. Everybody's going to connect to different people that they feel that they resonate with. So the more people that are out there talking about their experiences and creating spaces like you are to, you know, ease the path for people, it's just really important. So
Yeah.
thanks for doing
Awesome.
that.
Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for
you,
joining
Thomas.
us.
Yes, we'll keep in touch or come visit you. We'll do something
All right,
in the future when we can come back to connecting physically.
yeah,
Yeah. All right.
great.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.